Hi, I'm Christina, and this is a book review of How to Solve Your Own Murder by Kristen Perrin. So this is a mystery novel and it was published in 2024. So the reason I decided to read this book was the title. I absolutely love it, How to Solve Your Own Murder. I thought it was so intriguing and it absolutely drew me in. I am literally a sucker for a book with a great title. So let me tell you a little bit about the story. So this book is set in two timelines, the first of which is in 1965, and our main character is called Frances. She is 16 years old and she's at her country fair and she goes to a fortune teller. And the fortune teller gives her a fortune that says one day she will be murdered. So let me just read you the fortune because I think it gives you a nice little idea. So, your future contains dry bones. Your slow demise begins right when you hold the queen in the palm of one hand. Beware the bird, for it will betray you, and from that there's no coming back. But daughters are the key to justice. Find the right one and keep her close. All signs point toward your murder. Now, I think it's a really good fortune. I think it's a really good premise. But unfortunately, I found this book a little bit disappointing, a little bit underwhelming, and just kind of a little bit run-of-the-mill. So it kind of felt like I'd read it before. So the rest of the premise is we are set in kind of modern times and our main character is called Annie. So she is related to Frances. She's her great aunt and she has invited her to come and talk to her because she has decided to make her the person who's going to inherit her estate. And then all of a sudden, Frances is murdered and we are trying to solve her murder. So throughout her entire life, Frances has been obsessed with the idea of her own murder and has been actively trying to solve her murder before it happens. So that's the premise of the story, and I do think it's a really good one. I really like that kind of concept. I found it really interesting that there's a person who has been trying to predict their own murder and trying to figure it out before the event has even happened. I thought that was a really interesting premise and I really liked that idea. But ultimately, I thought the execution of it was a little bit poor. And just overall, I wasn't really connected to any of these characters. I found them all a little bit two-dimensional. They didn't really feel like real people as such. They just kind of felt like characters are in a story. So I didn't really believe these people were out there living their lives. They just kind of felt, a little bit one-dimensional and not brilliant characters. So like I say, I wasn't particularly connected to any of these characters at all. Also, we have the voice of Frances. When we look at the past, she's written a diary and Annie is actively reading this diary and we're learning about her past from when she was about 16 years old. And I would say the voice of Annie and the voice of Frances is really, really similar. And obviously one of them was 16 years old in 1965. And obviously Annie is, I don't actually know how old she is, but kind of like late 20s, early 30s, I would have said, and she has the exact same voice as Frances, and it just wouldn't have been that way in the sense that Frances had, money and she grew up in a different area, and I couldn't distinguish between the two voices in this story, which is a little bit of a shame. And also I just kind of found it just a little bit unbelievable at times. Some of that spoilers, so I will talk about that in a minute when I tell you there's going to be spoilers. And yeah, I just kind of found it a little bit run-of-the-mill. Like, ultimately, I think this is going to be quite a forgettable book for me. I can't think of anything that really stood out as something I really, really enjoyed. I mean, it was an okay book. It was absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with the writing. It's just fine. I don't think I'm really going to remember it. So ultimately, I think this is one that's going to just kind of fall away from me, and I'm not really going to remember anything that happened or anyone's names or anything at all. It was just an okay murder mystery. I think I have read quite a lot of murder mysteries, to be fair, so I'm definitely not new to the genre. So perhaps if you were newer to the genre, you would really enjoy it. But having read quite a lot over the years, it didn't really stand out as anything special or anything kind of new or innovative. It just kind of felt very run-of-the-mill. It felt like a mixture of a few stories that I'd read before, and ultimately, like I say, nothing really stood out. Not the characters, not the plot, not the actual mystery in the end. Another thing as well is that you are actually following two separate mysteries. So in the past, one of her friends disappeared, and obviously in the present we have the murder of Frances herself. So we are following two separate mysteries, and they're kind of intertwining because obviously it was Frances's friend. So it's, yeah, it was a good premise, but ultimately for me I think the execution just kind of let it down. And yeah, like I say, the characters are very run-of-the-mill and just, yeah, I just think it was just kind of fine. So I'm going to go into a little bit of spoiler territory, so obviously if you don't want to know that, just stop the video now and I'll say goodbye. But otherwise, one of the other things that I didn't really like about it is just how unbelievable it felt at times, and how the police just didn't seem as real police people would do. So basically, something happens here, and she basically moves the murder weapon, which just kind of boggles the mind. So essentially, Frances is killed, and she has some roses in her hands, and the thorns of the roses have needles inside them, and they cut her hands, and that's how they find her. They find her with some of the roses and her hands all cut. Anyway, the police come round and they basically say it's natural causes and it's definitely not a murder. And then Annie and a couple of other people are kind of like poking around where the body was found, and all of a sudden Annie's like, oh, I think actually she was murdered because there are needles like inside the thorns of the roses. And the police haven't found that. They didn't see that. They didn't like corner it off as a crime scene. They just kind of ruled it natural causes and left, which feels a little bit odd. And then all of a sudden, she sees that she thinks this is the murder weapon. She sees the needles and she can see that her hands have obviously bled, and she thinks this has to be related to her death. So what you would probably expect her to do, what I would expect her to do, is she would ring the police station and say, I'm still at the house of Frances and I think this was a murder. And I think I've identified the murder weapon. Please can you come down and take a look? But what she actually does is she takes the flowers, she takes the roses, she pops them in a plastic bag, and then she takes herself to the police station and just hands this over to the police officer. So essentially just contaminating evidence, contaminating a crime scene. And when she does go to talk to the police officer, he isn't like upset that she's done this or angry with her. He doesn't tell her that she's, you know, potentially ruined really important evidence, and she's none of that happens. He just kind of like, oh, okay. And then she also has something on her hand that she's not very well because of what's happened with the roses and the flower display. And I just think it's very odd that you think this caused somebody's death and then your immediate reaction is to just pick it up with your own hands. I don't know, it just kind of baffled me. And I think as well, I didn't mention, but Annie, the main character, is kind of between jobs at the moment, but it has been her passion and everything she wants to do. She wants to be like a murder mystery writer, like a novelist. And I would have just thought, probably just the normal person on the street, if you asked them, definitely wouldn't contaminate a crime scene and wouldn't move what they consider to be a murder weapon, because we just know that's not what happens in police procedurals. But I would have thought if she is a person who wants to be a murder mystery writer, she would have read a lot of books in the genre, she would have read loads of murder mysteries, she probably would have done research into, well, you know, the whole genre itself, and she probably would have done research into police procedurals and what happens in different investigations, what happens in different like famous murder mysteries. And I just thought it was really unlikely that she would do that and nothing would happen. And it was just kind of other things like that. That was just one example. But yeah, a little bit unbelievable. And yeah, I was just a little bit disappointed. So yeah, I've given this one 2 stars. It definitely isn't a bad book by any means, but it's just not really my cup of tea. It was, yeah, run of the mill, wasn't really connected to the characters, didn't think the characters themselves had distinguished enough voices from one another. And the dialogue just felt a little bit, I don't know, a little bit sloppy, and just, yeah, nothing really stood out. I would say I'm probably not even going to remember reading this book in a few months' time. Just a little bit forgettable, underwhelming, yeah. So yeah, wasn't really my cup of tea. I'm glad that I read it though, and I believe this was her first adult debut novel, so her adult debut novel, as opposed to her debut novel. And yeah, I think it was fine. I think the title really, really drew me in. And the premise was excellent, but the execution of it was just kind of fell a little bit flat for me. So if you have read this book, I would love to know your thoughts down in the comments below, and I will see you in my next one. Thanks so much for watching.